So in this video, we will look at the topic, the legislatures and their efficacy. We will look at 1861 now, right? So it is perhaps no secret that the legislative councils in India had no real official power till 1920. One only needs to take a look at the primitive provisions of the various acts that sought to change the structure and functioning of the legislative councils in India. In this experimentation of pseudo constitutionalism in India, which was merely a hogwash of the most brazen kind, the following acts are considered important. So, we'll sort of look at 6 acts here. So, the first one is the Government of India Act of 1858. The second one is the Indian Councils Act of 1861. The third one is Indian Councils Act of 1892. The fourth one is the Morley-Minto reforms of 1909. The fifth one is the Montague-Chelmsford reforms of 1919. And the sixth one, and perhaps the most important one, is the Government of India Act of 1935. So we have these 6 acts that were you could say pseudo constitutions, right? None of these acts actually gave power to the Indian people. They were only acts that were brought in to make sure that the Congress did not go overboard with their protests. The pace of changes to the councils, their constitution, working, and efficacy would put a snail to shame in a slow race. The changes were very small or even regressive at times. Power was never in any true sense given to the people or even to the representatives of the people elected by a limited franchise in the legislative councils. When we say limited franchise, it means it's a small number of people that vote to bring up the representatives who rule. Okay, this is in opposition to universal adult franchise, which is what we have today. Universal adult franchise means every adult who is a citizen gets to vote and choose the representatives that rule the country. Limited franchisee means it is almost like an oligarchy. A limited number of people are given the power to vote, and whoever they vote for will rule over the people. This is limited franchise. Now, back to the story. Along with the provisions of the acts, we will try and paint a picture of the legislative councils and the political society of the times. The Indian Councils Act of 1861 enlarged the Governor General's Executive Council from 6 to 12 members. All of these were to be nominated by the Governor General. The Executive Council was responsible for making laws. At least half of these members had to be non-officials, Indian or British. The Executive Council came to be known as the Imperial Legislative Council, and it possessed no powers whatsoever. This council could not discuss the budget or financial provisions of a bill, or even other important ordinary bills could not be discussed without the prior consent of the government. It could not discuss the actions of the administration. This wasn't even a parliament. To underline the hopelessness of this council, the council met for only 25 days in a year till 1892. In other words, the British government in India continued being an alien despot. Quoting Charles Wood, the then Secretary of State of India in 1861, all experience teaches us that where a dominant race rules another, the mildest form of government is despotism. This was in 1861 when the Indian Council Act came into effect, right? So he says when a superior race or when a different race rules another race, then the mildest form of government that you can expect is despotism. So again, you can see the racist comment within what is being said. So in India, there was a despotism that was being controlled from Britain, and it remained a central feature until the eventual independence. From 1862 to 1892, in 30 years, only 45 Indians served in the Legislative Council, an average of 1.5 Indians in the Legislative Council a year. Nobody could say that this was representative. The government invariably chose big zamindars and rulers of princely states or retired high government Indian officials as Indian representatives who were nothing but British agents and sycophants. Only a few politicians and independent intellectuals like Syed Ahmad Khan, Christodas Pal, and Raj Bihari Ghosh were nominated. An interesting story of the proceedings of the Legislative Council is as follows. Raja Digvijay Singh of Balrampur was nominated twice to the council, who did not know a word of English. When asked by a relative how he voted one way or another, he said that he kept looking at the viceroy, and when the viceroy raised his hand, he did so too, and when he lowered his hand, he did the same. Talk about towing the line. This is what the Rajas at that time did. It was not just this insulting way the British treated the Indians, but it was also the disgusting attitude of the Rajas of the princely states that led to the complete subjugation of the Indian people. In addition, most of the Indian representatives usually remained absent. Take, for example, the Vernacular Press Act of 1878. It was perhaps one of the most crucial pieces of legislation of the period, a horrible legislation. It sought to curtail the freedom of the press. You would think that the Indian representatives would have opposed a piece of legislation that struck at the very heart of Indian interests. There was only one Indian representative at the time of voting, and he voted for the Vernacular Press Act, a press act which was looking to curtail the freedom of Indian press. And in 1878, there was nothing else. Even the Congress was not born yet. There was no institution that was there to fight for Indian freedom. And press was the only way that at least some writings could reach the people. And the Vernacular Press Act was written in such a way that it would curtail press freedom. The Indian nominee was Raja Jyotendra Mohan Tagore, the leader of the Zamindari dominated British Indian Association. He voted for the Vernacular Press Act. In 1885, when leaders like Surendranath Banerjee were fighting for pro-tenant reforms, the two spokesmen of the Zamindars in the council helped emasculate the pro-tenant character of the Bengali Tenancy Bill. Once again, the Zamindars were opposing the interests of the tenants. In 1882, Calcutta's big merchants representative in the council opposed the reduction of duties on salt and recommended the reduction on professional and merchant taxes. Again in 1888, Dinshaw Petit and Pyare Mohan Mukherjee supported the enhancement of the tax on salt, while the nationalists in Congress and other organizations like Purva Sarvajanik Sabha and Bombay Presidency Association were fighting for the reduction of duties on salt. Remember, salt is a commodity that is used by the poor and rich alike. Salting tax has always been a sentimental issue in the history of India. Summing the dismal state of affairs, Madan Mohan Malviya said this: "We would much rather that there were no non-official members at all on the council, rather than there should be members who are not in the least in touch with the people and who betray a cruel want of sympathy with them." In spite of the nationalist rhetoric against the councils and the pseudo-Indian representatives at the council, they were careful in their diatribe and other movements. Till 1892, the demands of the nationalists were restricted to two major demands. One is the expansion of legislative councils to include more Indians. Two, expansion of the power of the legislative councils to discuss budget, financial matters, and to criticize the day-to-day administration. These were very, very simple requests. You can see that they weren't even asking for independence, or they weren't even asking for freedom. All they were asking was for some kind of representation and the power to manipulate the purse, a power hitherto not given to the Legislative Council. This concludes the video. Thank you.